Hello and welcome to another episode of Growing Guelph. This week in the Growing Guelph Podcast, I'm joined by Conor Russell and Morgan Dandie, two local organizers helping to launch Resistance and Resilience Guelph, a community-rooted initiative responding to the challenges of economic uncertainty, social inequality, and political instability. Together in this conversation, we explore their journeys into community work, the vision behind this new effort, and what it means to build a crisis-ready Guelph grounded in care, collaboration, and hope. Hope you enjoy listening to this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it. As always, subscribe, follow us on social media. With that, here's my conversation with Conor Russell and Morgan Dandie. Well, I'm very lucky to be joined today by Conor Russell and Morgan Dandie. We're here to talk mostly about a group that I think both of you were very, I don't want to say the founders of, but a group that is in the early stages of coming together, and I think you're both at the leadership table of that group, if it's fair to say. Resistance and Resilience is the name. I know it caught my eye as soon as I sort of saw it on social media, and I reached out to you, Conor. So I'm excited to talk to both of you. I know each of you really bring a rich and unique background into this work. Could each of you share a little bit about your personal journey and what first drew you to community-led action and advocacy?
For sure. I just want to start by saying thank you for having me. We're in good company. I know you got to interview some other Guelph folks that I look up to and admire. Shout out to Bobby at Three Pieces. He's an incredible community leader and designer. Glad to be here to chat about Resistance, Resilience Guelph. My journey in community action and advocacy, when I was younger, it looked more like, caring, accompanying, and supporting people in my circle of influence, people close to me. And as I get older, you start asking the questions about why people are in certain situations. That can look like social identity, marginalization, mental illness, or poverty. And so I always started small, no delusions of grandeur, of impact. It's all just drops in the ocean. But what is an ocean but a multitude of drops? And so as I would go to different volunteering gigs, starting with the environment and then poverty-related at Royal City Mission for many years, you get to know people, you learn, you ask questions, and you get a more systemized view of how it all goes. So community care turned into community action. And that looked like the different fundraising groups I'd be a part of. It looked like political advocacy at a local level. And then in my day job, it's much more internationally focused. So the community stuff I do here keeps me grounded and keeps me close to tangible impact. So now I've been involved with a few different organizations and most recently helping bring this one to life.
Well, thanks, Conor. It's nice to get a sense of your background in that. And yeah, thanks for saying that you're welcome or you're excited to be part of the good company involved in the podcast. It's really just kudos to Guelph for producing so many great people to, as I said last time on the podcast, that I think Guelph produces people that are worthy of talking to on this podcast faster than I am able to talk to them. So I'm never going to run out of people to volunteer to talk to. And Morgan, what about yourself? What's your background in this sort of work?
I think it all really started for me in childhood. I had a really super highly developed sense of social responsibility. And as I got older, that turned into a lot of anger about how little social justice I was seeing happening. And I guess more because I grew up in the 70s. So I guess it's been more a decline in the appearance of social justice in the spaces that I choose to be in. When I moved to Guelph in 2014, I got super excited because I found out that the political party that I had chosen as an 18-year-old, the leader of that party was running here in Guelph, and that would be Mike Schreiner. So in 2018, when I joined his campaign, that's when I really started turning into an activist. Through that work, Mike Marcolongo, who at the time was the leader of Protect Our Moraine Coalition, invited me to join that organization. And a lot of the work that I did was, first off, stopping a road going through the middle of the Marcolongo property down in the Clare Maltby secondary plan. And then the same group of people managed to force additional engagement when the community park suddenly landed on the one heritage landscape property in all of Guelph. We got that moved over onto where you can actually access Hall's Pond, which is to the north of the pond. And that entire experience galvanized me. I decided after that I was going to get involved in as much municipal engagement as I could. And in 2020, I decided I was going to run for city council in 2022. I was unsuccessful in that. And all of the work that I did between 2020 and 2022, I just kept going. I started building relationships with individuals that access services at Royal City Mission. And then when COVID hit, my marriage had dissolved shortly before that. I became unemployable through COVID due to dynamic disability. I ended up on OW, was evicted from my home, ended up on ODSP, and I've been living the experience that has created the resilience that I've been resisting for so long. So when the people that I'd worked with on both the Greens and the NDP, I heard them talking about this, it's like, I want in.
Well, first off, Morgan, thank you for sharing some of that personal journey. And your story is a really good example of why we need so many voices when we're trying to talk through not even just the solutions, but even just understanding the problems that we have. I mean, we see this in all levels of government, where if the only people at the table making decisions are already fairly wealthy, already well-to-do, probably very few of them experiencing like mental health concerns, they just don't even have the lived experience of their circle of friends even to know how difficult things can be for some element, like for some members of the Canadian public. And if those people don't have a voice, if they don't have, like you said, that lived experience, how can they even, like they're blind to the policy items that they're putting together. And it might not even be out of maliciousness. It's just a true ignorance of they don't know what they don't know. So I think the community and, successful organizations everywhere will rely on people like yourself who are brave enough to step forward and say, like, hey, I'd like to lend my voice to this effort and share. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Conor.
Nothing about us without us, right?
Yeah. And just being able to say, hey, in 2019, I owned a home. Today I'm homeless. I have a roof over my head, but it's not a home.
Yeah.
And I even said at the table with the current leaders of Resistance and Resilience, I'm the person you're all trying to not be. I'm what you fear. Becoming where I have landed is why Resistance and Resilience is so incredibly important.
Yeah. I think about this a lot when it comes to when you're hearing people's takes about how the world could be made a better place, and this is simplifying things to some degree, but I often see people who maybe lean closer to the right politically. They talk about individual action and they talk about individual responsibility, and I think that there's good solid lessons and takeaways and life planning advice and things like that they tend to focus on, that for any individual that you're dealing with, that might be useful advice. It might, a lot of it be like not very well attuned to their story and their situation, but there's interesting things that people can do for personal accountability. But all that said, you really have to deal with things in systemic, like what are the systems that are in place that have led to people being like, to not having enough, to not being able to take care of themselves. And for if you're dealing with an individual person, a useful strategy might be like, okay, what are ways that we could talk about, for example, if they're working, like, okay, say if they're working and they're making minimum wage, okay, maybe there's educational opportunities they could take advantage of. And like all of those might be useful for an individual, but systemically, if minimum wage isn't enough to live on, why, like, then it seems almost like a non-starter, because like the way the system is set up is everyone can't move out of minimum wage. Like there aren't enough non-minimum wage jobs to move to. And like, yeah, I think I get frustrated when people's advice is really only on a individual level, and it just kind of ignores the fact that like, well, if everyone in the world can't do that, then you're by definition creating a system where you're almost wanting some people to fail, if that makes any sense, or like system is designed to let some people fail. I don't know if that resonates with either of you. But
I think for sure another good example of a system level failure is legislated poverty. So for folks who can't even do the minimum wage work full time,
exactly,
the amount given to those folks by a system, our government system, is poverty. And that is crazy. And I think that's one element we really wanted to highlight, and I'm so glad Morgan is here and a part of it and highlighting it, is, yeah, the tariffs are here and the impacts are coming, but people have already been living in crisis before this. And so making sure at each step of the way, any programming we do, any advocacy we do, is a recognition that, like, we can't scapegoat our social ills to Trump. Not all of them. A lot of this is homegrown, and a lot of this was here before him, and may even be here after him, but we need to draw attention to it for what was before and what's to come after. Would you say the same, Morgan?
Absolutely. And I love that, you know, the resilience that so many of us, the people that lived at 90 Carden, they were already as resilient as they could be when they were dealt the final blow of get out. Mm-hmm. And even the people that lived in the building that had the fire on the north end where nothing's been done. I don't even remember how long ago that fire was. Just every single time that there's a removal of the most deeply affordable spaces for people to live, it creates more difficulty for those individuals that were already through the cracks.
Yeah. And I mean, even the term, we hear it so often these days, affordable housing. And I read I forget where it was, some sort of internet comment the other day that talked about, like, that's a fairly new term. It you wouldn't even hear it until, like, maybe the late 80s, early 90s. People started using the term affordable housing because previously housing just was affordable. There was luxury housing, for sure, but the ability to work like a minimum wage job, work anything, and get a rental for a reasonable amount of your income was just, people took it for granted. And like, you know, I think we're sitting here in my house that's 150 years old, and in one of my deep dives onto the history of the house, I've found a census, I think like 3 or 4 years after the house was built, where the estimated entire value of the property, and the guy, he was running a machine shop out of here, it was $800. Now, I know $800 was different back in 1877 or whenever this was, but it still wasn't several years' salary worth of like the value of the house now, right? And it's insane that we've moved from an era where people just used to be able to like build the housing that they needed, like, it felt like we came from a century of building, and now we're in this century of everything gets tied up in all of these like issues and frameworks that just like we can't navigate through, when like our technology is better than it's ever been, infrastructure is better, like all these things are so much better, yet like it's not translating into material quality for people on the ground floor. And if anything, it's like, I don't know. I've been feeling this more and more lately, that it's like, are we living in the ruins of like a fallen empire? Like, why is everything that's Morgan's nodding along, very, very much so. But yeah, like it feels like all of our, you know, before we were recording, we were talking about my logo, which features the what's the name of the church? Sorry, Our Lady of
Lourdes.
Thank you, Our Lady of Lourdes, which has, it's like such an iconic Guelph building, but why are all of our iconic buildings over 100 years old? And granted, we have newer buildings too and things like that, but like it's not, it feels like at some point the people in charge, quote unquote, or the people who, you know, run our society took a step back from the building of these great works and the building of these, you know, like billionaires used to like contribute back to society by building things and giving
Carnegie.
things to people. Carnegie Hall, like all, you know, all these things that now it's like, what are they giving us now? Like they're giving us vanity projects unto themselves and building. But I feel like we're getting. I'm the king of tangents on this podcast.
Hey,
so.
preach away. You're yeah.
But you know, we're not here to listen to my opinions. I want to hear from both of you, and I want to hear specifically about what would you call this as a is it a group? Is it a movement? Is it still kind of trying to be defined because it's still early stages? Speaking about resistance or resilience and resistance.
Yeah, Resistance and Resilience Guelph.
Resistance and Resilience Guelph. This is specifically a group to, well, I won't try to put words in your mouth, Conor. Can you give a brief summary of maybe what the goals are for the group?
For sure, to answer your question, it's yes, it's all those things. Mm-hmm. And what it is going to look like more formally is based off the community feedback that we get. So just as you're saying, all these decisions being made without people who are on the margins or impacted by them, if we're going to be community relevant, then we need to be community informed. Mm-hmm. And so our first event last week was about bringing people from the community who would be on the front lines either of impact or of the service to others impacted, was to make sure that we were forming something that was useful, practical, not redundant, that was helping organizations on their own terms. Because Guelph is pretty special, like the people are special, and there's lots of amazing organizations doing so much good work on food and housing, jobs. And so we wanted to make sure that any energy and action and resources we put are helping folks who are already doing the good work. Mm-hmm. So what it ends up looking like, we're happy to come back and tell you. But at this moment, it looks like a core group of folks with a pretty open table and people who have assigned themselves into working groups. So these working groups are looking at things like housing, things like jobs and job loss, things like food scarcity, the greater economy and business environment of the city, an internal infrastructure piece for all the folks who can do the great admin, treasuring, writing. And if you're interested in that one, come let me know. I know it's the least sexy sounding of all the groups, but it's really important. So right now we have this sort
You
of...
forgot one.
Oh, what was the one I was forgetting there?
Political advocacy.
Oh, goodness. How could I forget this? We were talking so much about it. So another thing there, of course, is the value that while we're not waiting for government to take action on these things, we will be advocating every step of the way for the government to act, municipally, provincially, and federally. Now, there are some programs in place, but a lot of the stuff that's suggested to the average citizen on what to do ends up being summed up in buy local, which for sure, go buy local. That's really important. But people are itching for more than just that kind of consumer solution. Yeah. And so right now it looks like this web, these connected pieces, areas that we have researched is going to have the greatest impact. But what it ends up looking like more formally, we're going to put together based off the feedback we got from last event.
It feels like we're in an interesting place when it comes to the economic situation, because it feels like there's a lot of us that are very aware of what's coming down the pike in terms of not just the tariffs, but in some ways we're still dealing with like a post-COVID world. And if the U.S. was operating like business as usual, which they're not, like what's happening with AI right now is, I want to say revolutionizing jobs, but it's really like destroying a lot of jobs and destroying like how people work and models of how things previously been done. And we're still right in the middle of, on top of all those things, trying to reckon with like the previous disruptions to our work and how, like the gig economy and the like erosion of unions and the erosion of pension plans for people. And like, it feels like all these things are just layered on top of what was already a very precarious economic situation for so many. And then at the same time, it feels like there's a lot of people who are kind of living blissfully unaware of what's to come. And they might not, either they've tuned out of the news or they're not being reached, and they'll find out soon enough. And then when all these things start to come together, like the support systems we have in place are already so weak, and they're already not functioning. Like we talked before about people on ODSP and like Ontario Works and these things, that they're not thriving by any means. Like how there's an entire framework that kind of stops you from thriving under those conditions. And when things get stressed, it will stress our current support services that we have. Like right now, I work part-time with the Salvation Army, and I see firsthand, like I literally go to some of the grocery stores in the mornings and pick up some of their food that they're going to throw out anyway. Mm-hmm. I could imagine that under worsening hard times, some of those grocery stores will say, like, sorry, we're not giving those out anymore. Our own workers are hungry, or our own workers have family members that have been laid off, and now suddenly the people start demanding, like, hey, that food you're donating to the Seed in Guelph, or you're donating to the Salvation Army or the food bank, people are going to start getting, I don't want to say greedy. Greedy is not the right word, because they're
desperate.
Desperate, thank you. People switch into survival mode, and they start looking at things from a scarcity mindset, that, you know, there's only so many calories to go around, and it won't be seen as like surplus. It'll start to be, it could get scary in terms of, it's already scary, but it could get even more dire for a lot of people in those situations. And right now we don't have great ways of combating that. And even,
And this past winter was incredibly hard for a lot of the individuals that are already living below the poverty line, because it was so difficult to be able to get out. Some people like me that have disabilities that are negatively impacted when it is colder out were literally eating cat food because it was all they could afford. Mm-hmm. These are some of the things that, as I said, people that are currently at that line where they are literally one bad decision or one difficult month away from losing their home, whether they're renting or they've got a mortgage. They're the ones that are the most afraid. And you were talking about the individuals that seem to be blissfully unaware. When they go and check their investments, they're no longer blissfully unaware, because everything that 4547, I'm sorry, I cannot say the name. He is 4547. Everything that he is doing has been impacting not only pensions in the US, like 401ks have tanked out. Yeah. It's been affecting pensions and pension funds across the world. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, my job is in the international development sphere. Mm-hmm. And for folks who know, like, that has been severely impacted by his actions. And so, again, being part of this organization helps me feel like, okay, I can't keep watching the news and doing nothing, right? And for those folks who are going to feel more desperate, or even the folks who are just feeling anxious and nervous, I think having an organization that's in place with this kind of mandate or this kind of goal, it at least gives an opportunity for them to get involved in something and not feel isolated. Mm-hmm. Because, people kind of go one or two ways in crisis. They can become more insular and desperate, or people start leaning into community a lot more. And so while the tariffs are here, the impacts are to come. And if this organization can be a good group of folks that welcomes the weary, the anxious, the people who need support or want to do something, it at least provides an opportunity to channel that anxiety into something a little more positive, which is my big, big hope for it.
Well, those are aspirational goals, and I think you two, at the very least, seem like you have the right set of considerations and like temperament to go into being at the forefront of a group like this. So this isn't this is almost more of like I guess a question for both of you, but I wonder what kind of lessons we can draw from history. Like, people have made some comparisons of the current moment and maybe lead ups into like the Great Depression and things like that. And I know I'm ignorant of a lot of the ways in which, like, how did society function through those times, and what tools do we have at our disposal now that we didn't have then? Like, in a lot of ways, we are more connected than ever. You're listening to us on this podcast, and this is like fairly new and unique technology, but in other ways, the connectedness has made us even more isolated from each other. We have moved away from like third spaces and community, or places of community like churches. The atheist in me is happy about our movement away from churches and things that can be negative about the church, but there's a lot there that churches functioned in society and for people that we don't really have a societally recognized institution that has stepped up in that place. I think groups like yours and other groups have really tried to build some of that community, but it's still early stages, and it doesn't have that cohesive unity that like a church community used to be able to provide for like a neighborhood or a community. And I don't know if any of us know how to replace that, like without I don't say the guilt of religion and that in place, but it can be a powerful factor for a lot of people, right? Just the unity of like being seen to be doing good in front of your community, and the esteem that people get with that when they donate and when they are recognized in that environment. It's yeah.
Jordan, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So you work for the Salvation Army as an atheist. How did you end up in that sphere? And maybe it kind of answers your own question a bit, like what brings you there, what keeps you there, and what do you get out of it, and what gets provided?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because the Salvation Army is very specifically a religious organization. I will say that they are very tolerant of... Tolerance not the right word. The structure of the organization is... It really... Like, there's that foundation of the religion that motivates people, but it really is about what they're trying to achieve. And there's no... like preaching that's done that like I'm a part of or anything like that. It's what, like, I work at the family services group, and it's really about just helping meet people where they're at and providing basic services and like the food and the other household items and assistance. My former boss who hired me, he was very upfront about, he's not in it for the religion. He was irreligious, and he kind of just said that, like, he said to me that, hey, in this organization specifically, you'll have to put up with people who maybe have differing views than you, but what unites us all is that we're here at a group that's trying to just give back and do good things for the wider community. But it's not always an easy... I guess I'd say it's not always an easy... choice to sit with, working with a religious group, because there are those conflicting emotions. I like to think that you kind of have to meet people where they're at and where they come from in terms of like what motivates them and their upbringing. I think there's a lot of people who are motivated to give back, and that motivation comes from a strong religious desire in their heart, and that the negative elements of religion that I experienced were, when I say negative, it was really just like, you reach a certain age and you start like questioning things, and then you question the dogmatic beliefs of it and things like that. But then as I get older, it's easy and easier for me to sort of say that, like, okay, the world isn't a solved problem. There's a lot of mysteries still out there. How people want to tackle those mysteries and what it means to them, it's going to be different for everyone. And I'm not just unlike 16-year-old me, I'm becoming more and more reluctant to say how people should believe, what they should believe. Maybe I care more about people's actions and what they actually, how they want to change the world. But
in a show me what you do, don't tell me what you do kind of way.
Yeah, exactly. I hope that answered your question, but
for sure, and
yeah.
I appreciate that. I think, reflecting on the question you asked, and one, commending you for being in spaces that maybe aren't always comfortable, but you see a value in, especially in terms of impact. I think what groups that aren't religious-based church ones struggle with is that sense of long-term community structure, because there's a unity piece, a connection to the transcendent and the spiritual that doesn't ebb and flow with what's going on in the community.
Yeah, it's like a deep part of your identity that, for better or worse, you can't even really choose it. It's what you're born into.
For sure. And I think when I think about the people who are unifying around this, there are two ways that people kind of unify. One, you give them a good enemy, and that, or two, there's something transcendent, a more than me feeling, which some then call religious. And so I think there are two elements at play from what I've heard from people at our events and as we've been forming, is there's the unity we're all kind of feeling as Canadians against Trump, a de facto, enemy. Even my good friends in Quebec are singing the national anthem, So there is that piece that, kid ourselves or not, the Orange Man, 45th, 47, brought a lot of the folks to the table at our event. Yeah. And when I was speaking to people, as much as we are trying to be focused on practical ways to help, this idea of the social support, the emotional support, or even the spiritual element of community did get brought up in a lot of circles. And people came up and they thanked me for even saying that word. So there is whether it's transcendent in the religious sense or transcendent in it's more than just me acting, there is a craving of people to have that piece. And I think if we structure this in a good way, we can acknowledge how people got brought to the table, this sort of common enemy trope, but we can provide something deeper that hopefully is more long-term. But Morgan, feel free to agree, disagree. What do you think on what you've heard from people?
So just so everybody knows where I sort of come from in this, I was brought up in a home where my father was converted to Catholicism from being raised in an Anglican home, and my mom was raised in a Presbyterian home and didn't really have much to do with the church that she was brought up in. I was allowed to find my own way, and through a lot of investigation of various religions, I actually ended up landing with, I'm a humanist. Because when I did my investigation, I learned that when you distill all of the world religions down to their basic tenets, they're really all just really good suggestions of how to live in community with others. So that idea of community is what I hold on to, because community is what allows each of us to feel a sense of belonging, regardless of what that community is, whether it's a religious community, a community of like thinkers, or a community like we're developing within Resistance and Resilience. Because one of the things that happened for me last week at that event was I saw people I had never seen out to any type of event like this ever before. And I go to a lot of them. Like, I am often at 4, 5, 6 different rallies and protests and, sit-ins or whatever's going on, because I don't limit myself to activism in one specific sphere. And this is the first time I have seen some of the people in that room with people that I see all over the place all the time. So having people that I have never seen come out and want to be involved was the most spectacular thing for me in that evening.
Yeah, it gives you hope. Also, I'm loving these conversations. It feels very 3 a.m. after the party talking about religion. And I'll put one more note on the religious trauma experience, but relating to this is this piece about community, this piece about the circles we choose to be a part of or who we invite in. I also have my 16-year-old phase with it. I've landed more kind of like United Church now because they're cool with the queers, and that's who I work for. I grew up pretty critical of institutional religion because I saw all the bad that came out of it, even in just personal family stuff. And then over time in the community model, the campus, someone cool you should talk to actually, Andrew Hyde, he's a campus chaplain at the University of Guelph. He does community dinners for students on campus every week, and those food is supported by the rotating churches in Guelph. But it was that dip my toe into community experience around food, around struggling students, that softened me up a little bit. And then over time, as I cared about international development impact, human rights impact, some of the groups that popped up were religious ones that were either leading in those places or trying to do a sort of repentant for what their past church history had done. And I ended up going to the World Council of Churches on a brief contract, which, going from being anti-institutional religion to going to an institution of institutions about it was pretty crazy. But it did mellow me out into a certain place where everything I'm critical of institutional religion for is true. And on the systems piece, the community piece, where there's common ground, you are more effective when you work together. So for them, it looks like healing the poor, feeding the poor, healing the sick, taking care of the planet. And they think, how can we be more effective together than we can be apart? But then where there's disagreement, which, no lie, is literal human rights lines sometimes, how do you create spaces for that with a voice to the marginalized? So when I think about that, kind of mellowed me out to it's all true and it's all true. They both can be. And I appreciate what people can do when they work together. And this group was formed out of an open invitation to many different groups. It started with a political element, of course, where I was invited to all the different candidates in electoral district associations during the campaign. And all are going to have vastly different ideas about the best ways to support and help people. But definitely that open invitation on what can we agree on, what can we be most effective on, pooling resources, and then create spaces for the natural debates that exist in a society and a community. So that's the goal of this. It was initially started between the NDP and Greens with a lot of support from Guelph District Labour Council. The initial invite coming from, I think, Dr. Anne-Marie Zadlik. She was very inspired by Charlie Angus and the resistance movement that has been taking over Canada. And we'll do the plug for our event with Charlie Angus a little bit later. But reached out to the NDP because they'd all been doing some work together on poverty alleviation before the election. The two groups and Guelph District Labour Council have been providing food at the bench with the Downtown Friends and Royal City Mission for many months before the election. Those were also all open invitations. But then these folks came together and said, okay, we're hearing this as we knock on doors. It's a really big concern for a lot of people. There's some common values here. And what can we brainstorm and ideate on ways to create more resistance to what's happening and resilience in Guelph, so that people know their leaders are caring about it and working on it. We're glad now, too, that Dominique and the Liberals have also joined in. They came to our last event. Dominique heard what the community was saying and then said, here's what I'm going to take back to Ottawa. So we look forward to that continued partnership. And likewise, we're going to continue to reach out to the Conservatives to join the initiative, too. But this idea of where there's common ground, you can be more effective when you work together. And community's messy. It's messy and beautiful. So where those disagreements happen, because best believe they're going to happen, how do you create space for those without taking away from what can be done well together?
And just to build on that a little bit, the More Than Meals program button on my knapsack.
For those who can't see, there is a beautiful backpack that Morgan brought with so many different buttons of all the different things that Morgan has been involved in. And it's beautiful to behold. And like Morgan said, shows up everywhere. A true community leader and champion here. So sorry to cut you off. Just wanted to give that little bit of visual for folks.
Thanks so much. So More Than Meals is the food connection that Conor was talking about. And one of the people that I know started really early on in developing the idea actually walked in. So it was Bonnie. She walked into Mike Schreiner's campaign office during the provincial election. I happened to be there. Bonnie's a friend of mine. And I was like, Bonnie, so great to see you. And she just wanted a contact to be able to reach out to Anne-Marie's campaign to start talking about what maybe the Greens and the NDP could do together. And Anne-Marie's campaign manager, David DeWert, thank you so much, David, for coming back to Guelph.
We miss you, David.
He was in the office in that moment. So I just said, David, I got somebody I need you to meet. And they sat down and they had a wonderful conversation, which I believe enabled David to provide Anne-Marie with a solid, yes, this is something that can work. Here's somebody to call.
And I think I just want to shout out all the brave people who did this, because it's not easy in the middle of an election to have enough trust and bravery to come into a room and kind of like, be a little bit tense, But Bonnie made that connection. Anne-Marie reached out. Janice, who's part of More Than Meals and this, the NDP candidate, and Nicole, Guelph District Labour Council president, these people were so brave, and it speaks to both Morgan and I are very multi-partisan.
Yeah.
Very multi-partisan people. So it may be a bit easier for us than others to enter that space, but it was community-focused bravery. And I'm always going to applaud the folks who showed up in the room, especially at the start. And I'm always going to applaud the folks who join in. But I just really want to commend those folks, because it's a brave and vulnerable thing to do, and it speaks to how community-minded they are.
It certainly is a good reminder for all of us that the things that unite us are often so much stronger than, the difference of color of the party that we voted for. And that even, the people who are, if you looked at a party that might be, ideological on the opposite side of, your preferred party, they're still coming to the table and they're still wanting to do something. And that's a world of difference of the people who are a little bit maybe more just checked out of the entire process. And that apathy is really the polar opposite of what brings so many of these people together. And that you're right, it's so valuable to, especially after an election, to sort of say, yes, we might have political differences in sometimes very important details of how we want to move forward, but we still all want to move forward, and we want to make the world a better place for us to live in, and also make us more prepared for potential negatives. I think a lot of us probably have a similar feeling where it feels like we live in a world of tremendous riches and opportunity, but because of the levers of capitalism and the way they shape the dynamics of the world and everyone's focus points and stuff, we have all of this, a surplus of riches, and we're just not shoring up the world in the ways that we need to. And that, I think about it all the time where individuals are told, have X number of months of all your living expenses, and you need to, before you start paying off this, you need to set this aside, you need to do this, and you need to do that. But then a great big company has 1 week of sales are down, and they just lay people off because they haven't done any kind of, setting aside funds to make sure.
Or they get bailed out.
Or they get bailed out. And, well, I guess... I feel like our conversation, I have questions that I will get through. We're already answering some of them just kind of naturally, but Conor, you've previously spoken about how community isn't just who's around you, but how you show up. What does showing up look like in both of your everyday lives, and how have you seen that reflected in others around you?
I'll start. For me, showing up is literally showing up.
Look at the buttons.
Yeah,
Look at the buttons.
I believe in community. I believe in the necessity of community. I believe in the power of community. And I believe community is our way through. So just show up.
Yep.
This coming Saturday, so it might be too late for the podcast, but on May 24th, there is a demonstration starting at the covered bridge about Bill 5, because it is so incredibly dangerous for all of us. So we're not only going to be dealing with Trump stuff, we're going to be dealing with, I said the name.
Oh, we can cut that out, right? We can cut that out.
Not only are we dealing with the 45, 47 stuff, but the stuff from our own premier and provincial government. So that's showing up, literally being there, and being there to listen if you don't understand what's going on, being there to understand, showing up with the desire for better understanding.
Yeah.
Everything Morgan said. Everything Morgan said. And for me, it looks like the small stuff, which I think is so important. To me, community action is informed by community care. So if you're looking for ways to show up, like, check your inner circle first. There's people who need rides places. There's people who need an extra meal. There's people with mental health and disability. There are people probably struggling with things you don't even know about. And I'll shout out Dominique on this. She said something pretty profound at the end of the event around resistance and resilience can also look like making sure everyone in Guelph has 5 or 6 friends. And that piece there connects you to other people and other networks. But I think the small stuff is showing up that way, and that makes sure any community action you take is informed by the care. I would also say showing up means speaking with, not speaking for. There are times when you're going to have to speak for, yes. But as much as you can, speaking with people who need that extra support in spaces that they're not usually brought to. And I'd say showing up means showing up imperfectly. I have the struggle of, I want to make sure what I present to folks or bring to folks is perfectly packaged, beautiful look at, fully thought through. And what a source of ego that is, to think that I would ever achieve that or anyone could. So even with this, I mean, like, if Conor just kept going his way, he'd be like, okay, we want you to sort out every little loophole, every little thing, every little like question someone could have. No, get over yourself. Show up imperfectly. Intention's always going to matter more than if you have all the knowledge in the world or all the right things to say. And one thing I really want to cultivate in the community spaces that I have some role in creating is making them safe and brave. Those are important, always centering the marginalized folks, but creating enough space for imperfection too, where someone can say an imperfect thing, and then because you know there's good intention, they're also open to hearing more perspective. I want to make sure the barriers to inclusion are lessened as long as the intention is good, but making sure that on the whole, it's been centered around the marginalized folks. So I think show up imperfectly, show up with grace, because I say this because I know I'm not going to get everything right either, and I'm going to hope the people around me give me enough grace and know my heart enough that they're going to correct me sweetly and gently, hold my hand through it. So I'd say show up for the small stuff, speak with, and show up imperfectly. Don't wait to be ready, because you never really will be.
Yeah, I think that's all really good advice. And so much of the modern world, I think, can be a negative influence on people's even just desires to want to reach out to sort of these groups and that, because there's malicious forces out in the world. Like, when we talk about the bots that fill our social media, or the foreign actors or foreign bots, or whatever you want to call it, people who are people, forces, institutions that are trying to make us feel hopeless. And sometimes the goal of, the enragement that people might call it, like enragement bait or whatever you want to describe it, like social media posts that villainize the opposite side of the political sphere that you might disagree with, but a lot of its intent isn't really even to spur you to action. It's just to spur you to fall even further into the spiral of doom scrolling and anxiety and the feeling of the world is hopeless. Don't go out there. Just keep scrolling for the next like dopamine hit. And to distract yourself with things that maybe make you feel good but don't nourish you in any important ways. And
feed the algorithm.
Yeah.
It's hungry.
Morgan, you had said that it was you were surprised to see so many new faces show up at a recent event. Do you have any inkling as to what motivated those people who normally don't show up to these things to go?
Conor, you were able to talk to a lot more of them because I had to leave the room because there were so many people there I couldn't even hear myself.
A great problem to have.
I know.
Yes.
Know. I had to find a quieter space to lead my group because my brain wasn't able to function in there. So, Conor, you had more opportunity. What are some of the things that you heard from people that aren't necessarily always in those spaces like I am?
For sure. Yeah, so it was a loud space, and one thing we want to work on is making more accessible spaces. We were happy with the turnout, but it requires some planning. The things I heard were like fear, anger, and sadness might bring people to the table. They might bring people to the event or Resistance Resilience Guelph, but they know that's not sustainable fuel. What is sustainable is seeing folks offline, not talking with bots, and seeing good people doing good work. And that's why Morgan and I probably keep showing up to events, is because I look at those buttons and I feel a little exhausted because I'm like, wow. But then also you keep showing up because it's kind of energizing too. And so I think there was a lot of fear, anxiety, and concern. There was some resolve, some people with a wonderful steely sense of resolve of like, yeah, I can't just keep scrolling. I need to do something. There were people that were curious, that had never been a part of something like this before. And that was a beautiful thing to hold on to as well. But that is one of the things we want to hammer home is, social media, and I think even mental illness, tells you not to go out, and it's a self-fulfilling thing. You feel worse and worse and you don't go out. But for those who can and are able to, being connected in community is important. And I think that's what keeps people coming back. So a lot of the folks there were invited from community organizations that are doing frontline service on the food and housing and jobs. Many were just concerned citizens. Many were folks who show up all the time. And I love seeing the Raging Grannies open for us. Oh, you should interview all of them. Oh my gosh.
Raging Grannies.
Raging Grannies.
Raging Grannies.
They open up a lot of social justice events. They're incredible. They do their own music, spin-off things based on the theme, and they open the event, and honestly, it's my favorite part. Maybe people came for the Raging Grannies. Maybe.
Who knows?
Yeah.
One of the things that the Raging Grannies do so incredibly well is they take well-known tunes that everybody has heard, doesn't matter how old or how young you are, and they put their own words to it that are simple enough for people to understand and join in.
Yeah.
That's really fun. Well, they're added to the list of the many Guelphites that I still will want to speak to in the future of this podcast. To speak to something that, Conor, you had brought up about part of building community really just means sometimes checking in on our close circle of friends. And something I've been thinking about is, I can't quote who I saw it from. It was a TikTok, but they said something along the lines of, if you want to have a community of friends, you have to ask things of your friends and not be afraid to reach out to them. And then on the flip side, to show up to your friends, to show up not just when it's convenient, but to just show up and be there. I've been thinking about that a lot with myself and my friend circles where it's easy to get into the habit of only really hanging out and having these nice hangouts where you sit around and you have food and you spend a lot of time catching up on each other's lives, but you're doing that after you've already lived your life for the week, if that makes any sense, as opposed to what might be more natural and maybe what we should be doing more of, which is just living life with each other. Like, go grocery shopping with your friends.
Yeah.
Go run errands with your friends. If you have children, maybe you can take care of, watch each other's children. And I think some of that is getting back to the community-driven culture that used to just be second nature, and how everyone used to conduct and live in partnership with their neighbors and friends and family. And our social circles have just gotten much more isolated. I mean, we're not that far from COVID, and COVID literally had us in bubbles of isolation that...
I was a bubble of one.
Yeah, and I can only, imagine how difficult that must have been. Like, I moved back to Guelph right during the COVID time, and I, am married to my wife, and my wife and I got to spend a lot of time with each other during that time.
And you're still together. Congratulations.
Yeah, we survived the COVID. Not all of our friends did in their relationships, but we did, and it can make you just sort of feel like everything that we've lost with our focus on living in these little nuclear families, as they're called, and who is that really benefiting other than, I talked about this on the Tool Library episode and things like that, where that isolation means like, every single family unit has to have their own refrigerator and their own furnace and their own tool for this and their own tool for that, as opposed to just the sort of community living that you can do where you're sharing resources. Who benefits from that? The capitalist companies that make those products that say, like, hey, not only is your washer going to, die every 5 years because it's what's it called, planned obsolescence.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
But also, like, you can't share a washer with your neighbors because that's not right.
Unless you live in a rental apartment building.
Yes.
Ugh. Imagine if you have one of those coin laundry machines. Anytime I go into a rental and I see that, I'm not trying to make enemies, but I'm like, I want to know the landlord's name. How dare you make someone pay $2 for laundry? That's crazy.
It's almost always REITs.
Call them out.
Real estate investment trusts.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when we're talking about housing, it's a whole other topic. And it is important for people to recognize that when you are investing your personal money in a real estate investment trust, what you're doing is getting dividends off the back of somebody paying rent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, this is one area I have to grow a lot in, is kind of the letting people be in the messiness of my own life. I'm big on the, like, being there for my friends. I'm big on being there for people in their messiness. No judgment, no problem. I'll show up 3 a.m. I'll do whatever you need. No. For me, this is where, let me tell you, capitalism has really ingrained itself in me. I have to grow in this because I am an independent, like, freak a little bit. I'm like, I don't want to have to depend on nobody. If I need help, if I'm coming to ask for it, I've exhausted every other option possible and then journaled about it,
so
and then thought about it.
If you're Conor's friend and he comes to you for help, it's a dire situation at that point, right? That is what you're saying?
And I have great friends who push me to say, Conor, even if you're not, like, in the most perfect place, like, we want to be there with you in the messiness. So I learned so much from the communities that care about me. Yeah. So full humility aside, like, I have a lot to work on here, but it's such an important piece.
It's so hard. I mean, RuPaul says it best with, if you don't love yourself, how the hell are you going to love anyone else? And it's that, like, I catch myself doing this all the time, like, with the people I love most, like my wife, where the negative self-talk that I have in my internal monologue, it's easy to start applying that to the people you're closest with as you just treat them as an extension of yourself. But then when you start doing that out loud, you start to realize, like, why am I being so mean to myself? Why am I being so critical? And like you said, you can be there for your friends, but internally you're holding yourself to that same level of perfection and judgment, and that's not helpful either. And it's difficult to say that, like, the first step of building community is trying to be, like, not be at peace with yourself, but I guess
Give yourself grace.
yeah, you have to build a community of one, like, of your relationship with yourself is almost the foundation to your relationship with others.
Be the change you want to see in the world.
Yeah.
All of it, yeah.
One of the things that I started doing a number of years ago is any time that I heard one of my friends' negative self-talk aloud, I would say to them, hang on, that's my friend you're talking about. And I don't let people talk about my friends that way.
Yeah.
And it just reinforces, hey, would you let a friend talk about another friend in the way that you just spoke to yourself? And having that and being able to internalize it really helped me to be able to tamp down the negative self-talk. So free gift to everybody out there.
Yeah, inner resilience. That's what it sounds like to me. Yeah, yeah.
So I guess speaking to that term resilience, so, the name of the initiative, Resistance and Resilience Guelph, I think that really stands out. But what do those two words mean to both of you personally? And how do you think they'll shape the spirit of the initiative?
Really quickly, for me, resistance is what I tried for so long to not end up living below the poverty line, and resilience is what I have developed since living below the poverty line. And it's time for me to share the lessons that the universe has graced me with everybody out there, because not everybody in my situation has the ability to allow themselves to be as vulnerable as I make myself be. I need to be the voice of others, and that is my resistance.
So for those who can't see, I'm definitely feeling that one. That one got me a little tear there, Morgan. I'm so grateful for you. Oh my gosh. The name was a tough piece when we were thinking about it. It speaks to, like, we wanted to show up knowing that we weren't going to have the perfect name either. A lot of us kind of don't like the word resilience because it's sort of something that puts the onus on the person to deal with it, dealing with stuff they shouldn't even have to be dealing with. So we struggled with it for a while, but we recognized that as much as it's not a perfect word, it is a necessary one, because that is what we have to do. We may not like it, but that's what we have to do. And the resistance piece, of course, came from that sense of the annexationist rhetoric, the wanting to cause damage to Canada and Canadians. And even one piece we put in our mission statement is around this idea of colonialism. Like, we're resisting, like, I say rhetorical expansionism and colonialism, but there's been plenty of people in Trump's government that have said much like heavier things about what they would like to do to Canada. And so the resistance piece there is sort of like, as we resist the sense of colonialism and expansionism, that rhetoric, also recognizing that we are in our own systems of colonialism and we need to lean on Indigenous wisdom in this experience too. The resistance piece was also a word we couldn't escape. So it's sort of like we were left with these two words. And there was the inspiration of Charlie Angus, of course, his resistance tour that helped spark some of this as well.
Elbows up.
Elbows up. Elbows up. June 19th, Royal City Mission, 7 p.m., but come at 6:30.
Pay what you can.
Pay what you can. Charlie Angus is bringing his resistance tour to Guelph. Resistance Resilience Guelph is hosting. It's going to be a great collaboration. I think this event is going to... We'll have the practical pieces, but really feed into the spirit of this Canada-wide phenomenon. Because while we're focused on Guelph as a community that people have said, reports have said, will be either the heaviest or one of the most heavy impacted communities, we are not alone, even as a city. Like, there is an entire country out there of people with the same anxieties and fears. We have particularities in Guelph we need to focus on, but Charlie's visit is going to provide some of that sort of unity feeling, that community, that spiritual piece. And it's a nonpartisan event, of course. But yeah, June 19th, definitely come out. Yeah.
Royal
let's
City
see.
Mission, 50 Quebec Street.
That's right.
Pay
That's
what you
right.
can.
Pay what you can.
Doors open at 6:30.
That's right.
This is a slight tangent, but something that I am grateful for of this entire situation and movement is it feels like we've been able to reclaim our Canadian flag and what it means to us. And it's nice to have some of that, like, the pride in what it means to even reckon with Canada as an entity, because, you know, it felt like for quite a long time, the things like our national symbol of our country, our flag, and those symbols were sort of co-opted by people that I know I didn't agree with, and what they were signifying by proudly, you know, displaying the flag from their pickup trucks and things like that. And I think it doesn't mean that, like, you know, I'm, like you said, it's a long, messy history of Canada, and there's a lot of things to reckon with, but it's nice that there's this unifying force where if I see someone flying the flag, I now just assume elbows up and, like, oh, you know, we care about who we are, and some of that is defining who we are is who we're not. And yeah, I guess I have to say I'm grateful for the kind of recapture of the flag. Does that resonate with either of you? Or
With me, it really does.
Yeah.
Because on June 1st, I guess it was it 2021? I've lost track of time. So shortly after the announcement of the first 215 unmarked graves that were rediscovered in Kamloops, on June 1st, there was an event on the steps of Our Lady. And I heard a young Indigenous person speak. And in that moment, this young person said that it was so great for them to see all of the orange shirts out there, and that if there was anybody that was there that day that was waving the flag of genocide a month from that day, then them being there on that day meant absolutely nothing. For me, that was an absolutely huge oof moment, because I got married on Canada Day. I was part of a couple called the Canada Couple. Everything I had at the beach was a Canada flag.
yeah.
And in that moment, I went, yep, you're right. I even went so far as to stop standing for the national anthem, because as a personal point of protest, until the majority of the 94 recommendations that came out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, until the majority of those had at least been started, I did not feel that standing for the Canadian anthem was something that I could do any longer. Mm-hmm. I now stand for the national anthem when I'm in chambers. That's how much of a change this has enacted in me.
It really puts things into perspective, I think, because, I mean, if you can draw the correlation or the analogy between countries and families, it's kind of like, you know, I think a lot of people have a sense of, I'm allowed to criticize my family. I'm allowed to say anything I want about my siblings.
Yeah.
But how dare you say something about my family?
Exactly.
And it feels like when the existence of Canada begins to be questioned, then you really have to start, like, looking at it and say, okay, yes, we have a very complicated, messy history, and we're all still living in the, you know, every day is connected to the day before it, and history feels like a long time ago, but it's just a long series of days between today and, you know, the factors that shaped modern Canada. But when we exist, we have that ability to reckon with that history, and being like actually annexed by another neighbor like takes away those choices from us, takes away our ability to even reckon with that. And now suddenly we say like, okay, wait a second, like let's continue to have our self-introspective, messy conversation. Let's continue to have that, and we're not going to be able to have that in a world where certain U.S. Elected officials get their desires.
Yeah, for me, it's a combination of yes and, holding many truths in my head at the same time, and living in the now and the not yet. So obviously the not yet of what I'd like Canada to be, we're not there. But we can live in the now of what we are. And I mean, I'm only speaking as someone who is like, white whose family came here only a few generations ago. But like, I am so grateful for Canada in so many ways, like, especially as a queer person, like, oh my God, I'm so glad I live here. And like, there's so much messy and present nonsense in history. Nonsense is the sweet way of putting it with Indigenous folks. But it has been nice to, as I live in the now of who we are and what we can do in this moment, and we are Canada, and the not yet, to be able to see that flag and one, not be maybe as afraid as I sometimes would feel, which is a really strange thing to say that I don't even think I've recognized until now, but
no,
it's nice that people...
true, right?
Yeah.
Like when the flag of your country becomes a symbol of potential fear, of mistrust, like I think it was either 2021 or 2022, it was camping with some friends, camping over Canada Day, and my wife had some little like Canadian flag things that we were going to put the camping posts, that little posts that each campsite has. And we were with a friend whose like immediate reaction was, we can't do that. Like, what are people going to think? They're going to immediately assume who we are. And yeah, that was an interesting idea that like symbols are important, and there are some symbols that are worth fighting for. And maybe our flag is one of them. That like it doesn't. Fighting for the symbol of the country doesn't mean that, like, yeah, you stand behind everything that country's ever done. Of course, yeah.
As much as I dislike how few of the 94 actions have been put into action, I'm still standing up for the Canadian anthem because it is a show of support for the country that I was blessed to have been born in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's what Charlie's Elbows Up is all about.
Yeah, I can't wait for that. I do want to make sure, like, one of the invitations and things that we want to put out is to, like, our Indigenous community in Guelph. The many different communities of Indigenous folks, I should say. Because I'd love to have, like, the nuance in there, and I'd love to have the many perspectives and many truths about it. Because no doubt this is a unifying piece, and it comes down to country lines. But I'm always going to have imperfect language, and even on this piece about like Canada, what does it mean to show up? Showing up imperfectly. I want Canada to show up, and I want it to show up in its imperfection. You know what I mean? So, yeah, that's what I want to see from our leaders: show up imperfectly, strive for better.
And to take this back to something that you had talked about earlier, which is being a perfectionist can be tricky, especially in all elements of life, because you're always so aware of the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And I think that same sort of perfectionism is what allows us to be so constructively critical of our elected leaders, of what we're doing, because we want it to be better. We want to be doing more.
It's out of love, yeah.
Yeah, but it's not a tear the whole system down and, government be damned and everyone just take care of themselves. It's a desire to do more with what we currently have. And I think, any group needs voices like, yourself, Conor, where you're always striving to make something perfect. But then you're also open and you're willing to, when someone says like, hey, it's good enough in this moment to move forward in this way, that kind of push and pull from within each group does allow things to kind of move forward and in progress.
You're kind to say so. And one of the things that we were soliciting at our last event, and we're continuing to solicit, is feedback. It is critique. And, we have our draft mission statement, our structure that we're working with, the idea, what we're thinking of. But to me, success at that last event and success looking forward is that all changing, like, or people at least editing it. Like, that open to critique piece is so important because it means that it is community informed. And as Morgan reminded me in our drafting for the event, Guelphites have no problem letting their voice be heard. So I'd say let your voice be heard to your elected leaders, let your voice be heard to what this organization shapes up to be. We want it. We want to hear it.
Mm-hmm. And like we said, there's a lot of malicious people out there that want you to feel like you're powerless, that your voice isn't being heard. But that's not true. There's a lot of people in Guelph who want to listen, who want to bring people together. I'd encourage everyone, if there's more people who are listening who feel like they want to get involved in something like this, but they're scared by it, they're uncertain, just know that a lot of people share that same fear and uncertainty. And if you reach out and put some of that out into the world, like, you'll be bolstered by even the people who get up there in front of a microphone. They're afraid. I'm speaking into this microphone. I'm afraid. Like, there's fear, and I think behind a lot of us, and it's just sometimes doing the scary thing. You do it enough times, and you start to build up a bit of I guess resilience is a good word to describe just the getting comfortable with the discomfort. So I guess to kind of wrap up some of this conversation that we've had, and to maybe end things off on a positive note, in the midst of doing all this work, what keeps both of you going, and what gives you hope or reminds you that this work matters and that you're not in it alone?
Well, I'm going to hit that one first, because as soon as you said that, something popped into my mind. So much of what I do, I always feel like nobody's listening. It doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And I just keep going anyway, because if I stop, what else am I going to do? Recently, a community member reached out to me, and I'm actually going to plug them. Lisa Baird of the Community Acupuncture Clinic on Norfolk Street, right in the downtown. She reached out to me because she recognized that the unwaged work that I do has directly benefited her. That is what gives me hope. When I get one community member letting me know that something that I did is actually impacting them. It just takes one.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One thing I try to ground myself in, because I think we're all kind of folks who keep needing to do more, or feel like we need to keep doing more all the time. And one of the most grounding things is knowing that, like, if I've even helped one person, that's actually good enough. I might say that to myself in my little journal at night, but no, it's not changing how much we get involved in, is it, Morgan? But that's a grounding piece. I'd say what keeps me going is, it's fear, anger, and sadness, the injustice, valid reactions to injustice, and bring you to the table, but they're not sustainable fuel. What keeps me going are folks like Morgan, are the other people who've come to the table, the organizations, the labor unions, the political groups, the concerned neighbors. And I just want to say, we've talked about a lot of heavy subject matter, but we're actually really fun people. And there's a lot of laughs and a lot of great times. Mm-hmm. It's important to have these heavy conversations, but know that if you come hang out with us and you come be a part of this, it's not all doom and gloom. It's actually very bright, and that's part of what keeps me coming as well. Again, those things bring us to the table, but it's the community piece and the good people that keep you coming. And come for the crisis. Stay for the people, I guess, is one thing I'd say.
Stay for the party, because when you're in community, it's always a party.
Yeah. And joy is doubled in community, and suffering is halved. I think I read that somewhere. That's not a me quote, but it's so true. That. It's so true. Jordan, I want to thank you, because, like, this podcast, this project you're doing, is building community, especially for folks who can't always show up in person to places. So this is a big part of the work. I think you're already doing Resistance, Resilience Guelph, Jordan. I don't know. Thank you for that work, honestly. No, for real.
No, I thank you for saying that. I'm, like a lot of people, I'm the first to try to say, like, oh, no, don't. But I will resist that. I'll work on the resistance, and I'll say, like, I'll take the compliment. you're welcome, I guess. It feels even weird to say, or I want to say the millennial, like, oh, it's no problem, no problem. But what you just said about how in community, even the worst times can have like glimmers of hope and a spark of community. I've recently gone down a rabbit hole of learning all about World War One. Unrelated reasons, but I've been watching a lot of video footage of like the soldiers in the trenches in these situations that couldn't be any closer to like literal descriptions of hell on in the trenches. But what you see are young, youthful people smiling together, laughing together in the worst situations you can imagine.
Yeah.
People find community and they forge bonds with each other, and they just focus on the day-to-day and what they're going to eat and what they're going to do. And I think that gives me hope in seeing like, humanity. It's easy to look back at moments like that in history because we know that the story continued. But for some of the people in those trenches, for one, a lot of them, their story ended there, and they didn't know the world was going to get any better. And they literally thought that, like, maybe this was the end of days. Like, maybe the Industrial Revolution led people to create horrific weapons of war, and that was going to be the end of humanity, was just, like, men being ground down to, like, meat in a awful situation. But we persevered and we got through that, and we've had 100+ years of ups and downs. But overall, there's a lot more humans alive today than there were then. We have better living conditions. We are tackling even more complex problems. And hopefully people 100 years from now will think back to us in a similar ways,
Yeah, I'd say we can't always control those external circumstances. Those soldiers couldn't control everything that happened in World War One, but they could control how they showed up for each other, and that's why you see some of the smiles. Even that one story from World War One with like the Christmas truce always gives me hope. Same wise here, like we can't control Mr. 4547. We can't control all the things happening in the world, but we can control how we show up for each other. Yeah. And that can include joy.
Yeah. And especially our, brothers and sisters who are living under that president, who don't share his values, who we have so much more in common with them. And I don't want us to feel oppositional to even, people across Canada who maybe don't agree with us, but even the people across the world who there's so much more that unites us, and we're all so much closer in, I think you said that you're a humanist, Morgan.
Yeah.
That, and I hope that some of those humanist ideals can be the guiding light that pulls humanity forward, because there's a lot of good there. There's a lot of good in us as humans. Sometimes on this podcast and in other situations, it's easy to zero in on the negativities, but I think that's just because a lot of us are empathetic people and we want to do something about those negativities, so they're what our focus is on. But yeah, this has been a optimistic conversation on my part. I'm leaving here feeling bolstered by both of the efforts that you're doing, and also just the knowledge that Guelph is full of so many people who care so much. So if people are listening and they're interested, they've heard about the is it called the Elbows Up rally, or the
Elbows Up, the Resistance Tour. Charlie's coming to Guelph June 19th, 7 p.m. Doors open at 6:30 at Royal City Mission. Pay what you can. There's the Eventbrite link we can send. And if you need a free ticket or want to get involved, you can email rrguelph@gmail.com. That's our working email at the moment. Lots of ways to connect in person or virtually.
Perfect. And, anywhere else on social media that people, or if people want to learn,
pretty
find out
much
more
right
about
now it's the
it's
email.
coming. It's coming.
We're very young.
Yeah.
We're very young. We were all working on an election last
my
month.
gosh. Yeah, I'm still recovering. Yeah.
Well, I hope this is maybe the first of many conversations, and I've said that to a couple people on this, but I mean it in those situations too, but I really do mean it here too. That I hope that 6 months, a year from now, we can have another conversation, and it'll be, look how far we've come, look at all the stuff that's happening, and in the meantime, I look forward to seeing how it develops, and best of luck to both of you and to everyone involved in this work.
Likewise, Jordan. Look forward to the conversations you have with other amazing community leaders.
And yeah, there are lots of them. So you will not run out of people to ask to interview. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for listening to Growing Guelph. I've been your host, Jordan Sloggett. Be sure to subscribe to us on social media, on your favorite podcast app, and if you have a recommendation for a future guest you'd like me to speak to,